The Mermaid. I had always grown up with the stories. The folklore of beautiful aquatic creatures that were half woman, half fish. Then, Disney's The Little Mermaid premiered, and the image of mermaids were perceived as friendly and gentle with beautiful voices. Little did they know how wrong they were. I remember the first tale I heard of mermaids was from my grandpappy. Dementia ripped his memory to shreds, so he immigrated from Russia to Brighton Beach in New York City to be closer to family. The stories were always the same, beautiful women meeting a violent, brutal death that were then rescued by the ocean and transformed into a beautiful mermaid with a haunting song that brought death. I grew up with these fables, always thinking that they were just that. Fables. Until I came face to face with one. I had always been tempted by the ocean. It was a serene mystery that always called to me. One night, against my husband's better judgment, I decided to go down to the pier and walk the beach. Maybe even take a midnight swim. The sea was calm that night, gentle waves guided by moonlight. The sand was frigid, the grains coarse between my toes. The water called to me that night, compelling me to come and join it. I slowly walked into the ocean. The onyx waters licked my ankles, gobbled up my legs, and caressed my waist. I let it capture me. I had been floating on my back when I first heard the singing. It was a bewitching melody, tranquil and celestial. When I first saw her, I wasn't afraid. She was tall and slim, with plump breasts and an hourglass waist. Her champagne hair fell in long, loose curls and her flesh glittered like moonlight. Perhaps what was most captivating about her was her eyes. They were blazing emeralds with no pupils and long spider-like eyelashes. She wore a light, sheer robe that was composed of mist. Her tail was iridescent scales of green, blue, and purple. She sang a foreign tune as she held her arms out to me, inviting me in. I swam to her, her song ricocheting from eardrum to eardrum. "Come here, child," she cooed. She gathered me in a watery embrace, singing softly into the crook of my neck. Slowly her arms slithered around my body and she began dragging beneath the water. I was too mesmerized by her song and beauty to realize what was happening. Water filled my nose and mouth, the salt of the sea stinging my corneas. She pulled me deeper into the blackened waters, and that's when I saw the corpse. It was mangled and torn to shreds with chunks of flesh torn from the muscles. I snapped out of my trance and began to scream. Bubbles erupted all around me as I tried kicking and flailing my arms. The mermaid's grip became tighter as I thrashed for freedom. She sunk her needle-like teeth into my shoulder and the water became crimson. I wasn't going to let myself let go. I maneuvered my back against her and managed to get one of my arms free. Panic had fully set in and I knew that if I didn't get away, I was going to a watery grave. I flailed my arm randomly and managed to punch her in the cheek. Then again in the nose. With a loud shriek, her grip loosened and I thrashed, freeing my other arm. I began to swim with everything that I had. I got to the surface and gulped in as much air as I could as I swam harder and faster than I ever had in my life. Minutes later, I reached the shore. I crawled onto the sand, sputtering and coughing up water. My heart was beating millions of miles a minute and I started hyperventilating. Since then, I haven't been back to the ocean. No one believed my story. My husband merely laughed, slapped me on the back, and said, "Good one, babe. Please, there has to be someone out there that witnessed the same thing I have."
I met a mermaid. I remember exactly the moment I saw her. I couldn't help but notice her crooked smile and wild eyes. She looked like she had a story to tell, and for some reason, I desperately wanted to know what it was. I was drawn to her, and I struggled to keep myself from staring. She tipped her martini to her lips again, smiling to her friend. Her round eyes shone blue from beneath her messy bangs that hung below her brows. With a brush of her slender fingers, she moved her tresses from her face. Her eyes scanned the bar and met mine. I smiled awkwardly and looked back down to my book, hoping she hadn't seen me unable to take my eyes away from her. I propped my head up with my hand and tried to block my face from her pondering looks, but I could feel her gaze and knew it wasn't working. My heart pounded in my chest, and I suddenly felt nervous and sweaty. Great, as if that wasn't unattractive enough. Why was I so intrigued by this random girl at a bar I attended far too often? This was a small town, and she was new. She was different, dark, beautiful, and mysterious. Who was she? And where had she come from, to end up here? I looked over to where she sat again and felt my heart sink when I saw that she and her friend had left. I stood up and made my way to the restroom, using it as a reason to look around the bar as I walked. She had definitely left. After using the facilities, I made my way back to my usual spot at the bar and noticed the book I had just been reading had disappeared. Confused, I approached the bar and waved down the bartender. "Leo, did you see anyone take my book?" I asked. Leo shook his head and shrugged. "Sorry, sweetie, I didn't see anyone here at the bar," he replied. "Oh. Okay," I said quietly, shoving my hands in my pocket. "Can I have another beer, please?" "Sure thing," Leo said. I looked over my shoulder. Where had she gone? She was perfect, and I wanted to look at her again. Looking for this? A voice chimed in my ear to the left of me. I jumped in surprise and turned to face the person who had spoken. My heart nearly soared out of my chest. It was her, and under her chipped manicure was my book. Yeah. Thanks, I said. I didn't know what else to say. She was even more beautiful up close. I took a moment to examine her face silently. Light freckles dotted her face across her nose and cheeks, and her big blue eyes were surrounded in obscenely long perfect lashes. Her dark wavy hair fell gracefully around her shoulders and down her back, and her bangs framed her perfectly angled face in a way I couldn't describe. She was literally perfect. And that was just her face. My heart raced in my chest as she smiled her crooked smile and slid my book over to me. I smiled shyly, still unsure of what to say. What could she possibly want with my incredibly boring accounting book? "I'm Nerissa," she said, holding out her hand to me. I extended mine out to greet her handshake and examined the rest of her body subtly. She was tall and slender, but had perfect curves that were soft. She was dressed in a black dress that stopped at her knees and clung to her body in all the right ways. Her legs carried on for days and ended with slender feet tucked into black pumps. Even with her sitting, I could tell she was perfect in her body as well as her face. I wanted to vomit. "Nice to meet you," I said hoarsely. "My name is Quinn." Nerissa dropped my hand and reached for her purse. I couldn't stop watching her every move. Her movements were mesmerizing, and she pulled out a stick of tinted lip balm and applied it to her lips. She smelled delicious. I wanted to touch her, but I refrained. "You're studying accounting?" she asked casually. "Yes, I'm in the first year of my degree," I replied. Why couldn't I say something interesting? She must find me incredibly boring. "Smart choice," she said, and I nodded. "Where did your friend go?" I asked. My eyes darted around nervously. "Home," Nerissa replied. This was far too awkward. Why couldn't I just hold a normal conversation? "So, where are you from?" I asked as a last-ditch effort to make our conversation interesting. "Over the ocean," she replied simply. "So, Europe?" "Sure," she replied with a shrug. I could not wrap my head around her presence or her vague answers. "You don't have an accent," I pointed out. Again, Nerissa shrugged. "Another drink?" I offered. "I'll have a martini," she smiled, almost as if the prospect of another alcoholic beverage was exciting. I wondered how often she drank. "Leo, can I get another martini?" I asked him as he made his round at the bar. I smiled sheepishly when he nodded and eyed my untouched beer he had left in front of us. "Not for me," I said and motioned my hand toward Nerissa. He nodded and smiled at her, too long for my liking. I don't know why I felt possessive over her. I had only met her, but she was mine. "Do you enjoy studying?" she asked. "Well, not realty. I just want to pass my classes." "But what brings you here?" "This is probably the most exciting place in town," I asked. I was dying to know her, know where she was from, why she was here, and why she was talking to me. She looked around the bar. My home is boring, she replied simply. I seek new things and new people. I like it here. There are more exciting places than this tiny town, I chuckled. Will you show me? She asked, all seriousness on her face. Did that mean she wanted to see me again? What were the odds of that? The Mermaid of Venice. It was raining hard that day in Venice, and it did not seem like it was going to let up any time soon. We only had a couple of days in Venice before we were to travel west to Genoa, so we had decided to arm ourselves with umbrellas in order to brave the weather and take in the sights. In spite of the weather, we had a great day. We took the boat out to Murano on the lagoon, where we bought some cool glass souvenirs, and we even managed to get inside St. Mark's Basilica. This was something I had never managed on any of my previous visits to the city, but on that day the line was mercifully short. It was great, but by the end of the day, we were soaked through. On our way back to our hotel by the Grand Canal, we stopped by the Church of the Scalzi. At that point, we were pretty eager to get back to the hotel and put on some dry clothes, but it was on the way, so we figured we might as well. We sat down at the pew at the back and took in our surroundings in silent contemplation. Just like pretty much any church you might walk into in Italy, it was absolutely beautiful. We were alone in the church except from a young nun who was sitting 6 or 7 pews in front of us and had briefly turned her head to look at us when we entered. She's pretty cute, huh? Johnny said to me, elbowing me in the ribs. Quiet. I hissed back at him. What if she speaks English? Johnny just shrugged in reply without saying anything. I had to admit that she was pretty cute, and if she understood what we were saying, she made no indication of it. We sat there in silence for a couple of minutes before the young sister got up and went towards the exit. As she walked past us, she gave us a shy smile. I reciprocated the smile and lifted my hand as if to wave goodbye, which made her quickly lower her gaze and turned her face an adorable shade of pink. As she passed us, I could have sworn that I smelled something weird. There was a sulfuric quality to it, and a fishy kind of brininess. It honestly wasn't far off smelling like a day at the beach. I looked at Johnny, who was eating her with his eyes, and didn't avert his gaze until the door had slammed behind her. Did she smell funny to you? Maybe kind of fishy? I asked him. Johnny responded with a sagely remark about feminine hygiene and told me that even the brides of Christ are not immune to a little trouble with the undercarriage every now and then. Johnny had not smelled anything. That was hardly surprising, though. He had caught a cold and was so busy taking in the sight of the nun leaving that he had probably forgotten to breathe. We went back to our hotel, where we took a shower and changed into some dry clothes before heading out for dinner and a night out in town. I had wanted to try some local food, but after not being able to find the place we had picked out on TripAdvisor, we decided to just hit the Hard Rock Cafe. Not very exciting, but the rain was still coming down hard, and the Hard Rock Cafe had the distinct advantage of being a dry place to sit where you could also get something to eat. After finishing our burgers, we had a couple of beers and then went in search of a place where we could have a couple more. We found a nice little pub where we fell into conversation with a group of local university students and some backpackers from Australia. They were great company and we were having a blast. By 1 a.m. I was pretty tanked and went outside to smoke a cigarette. The heavy rain had turned into a light drizzle, and other than a young couple sharing a joint a couple of meters away from me, the street was pretty much deserted. That's when I saw her, the young nun from the church, standing maybe 30 meters further down the street. She smiled at me shyly, the same way she did in the church, and motioned for me to come closer. She was pretty cute and I was pretty drunk, so I happily obliged. As soon as I started moving towards her, she began walking away from me. That night she led me on a merry chase through the maze that is the streets of Venice. If I tried to walk faster or run to catch up with her, she would pick up the pace, and at no point was there less than 10 meters between us. Yet she kept egging me on, smiling at me and beckoning me to follow her. The light drizzle had once again turned into rain. I was drunk and had no idea where I was anymore, but I didn't care. All I cared about was following her. I must have been chasing after her for at least an hour when she finally stopped by a canal and turned around to face me. She smiled at me seductively and motioned me to come closer with the playful movement of a finger. Right there and then I knew I loved her and that I would follow her anywhere. I walked to her and she embraced me and kissed me passionately. She tasted like salt water, and her lips and her body were cold to touch, but I didn't care. At that moment, I was the happiest I had ever been in my life, and all I could ever think of was how I would do anything for her. Then I heard someone calling my name. I abruptly turned around and saw Johnny walking towards me. "Where have you been, man? I've been looking for you everywhere." My head felt foggy and I didn't really know how to respond. I turned around to look at the pretty young sister, but she was no longer there. She had vanished without a trace. It was only then I realized how close I was standing to the edge of the canal. One more step and I would have fallen in, and in my drunken state, and this being November, I am not sure I would have ever gotten out of the water. I didn't tell Johnny about the nun. He is a rationalist and skeptic like me, and he would never have believed me. We walked back to our hotel in silence, and the entire way I walked as far from the canals as possible. The only thing I said to Johnny before we went to our rooms was that I would like to leave Venice as soon as possible. The next morning we checked out of our hotel and took the train from Venice to Milano and from Milano to Genoa. It is from my hotel room in Genoa I am writing this. Yesterday Johnny was Skyping with one of the Australian backpackers we met at the pub. Apparently the body of a little boy had been fished out of one of the canals after we left. He had disappeared from his parents' hotel room in the dead of night, and no one had seen a thing. Patrons at a nearby pub had sworn they had seen a little boy in the company of a nun that night, but it was dark and it had been raining, so none of them were too sure if it had been the same little boy who had drowned in the canal. My experience in Venice had unsettled me deeply, and upon hearing this news, I went outside for a stroll by the harbor, just to clear my head. As I stood there smoking a cigarette and looking at the water, I could have sworn that I saw her face in a school of fish. It was just for the briefest of seconds, and then it was gone, but I am sure I saw her smiling. At that moment, I was struck by a profound feeling of loss. The cry of the gulls call out for me to join her beneath the cold waves, and the wind whispers that she longs for me too. Just one small step, one little sacrifice, and we could be together forever in the darkness beneath the waves. I need to get out of Genoa and away from the sea as soon as possible. I am scared shitless, and I fear that if I remain here much longer, I will jump. Tomorrow morning we will leave for Florence, but even as I am sitting here typing this, safe and dry in my hotel room, I can hear her calling out for me. She says that she loves me and that she will never let me go. Only God knows how afraid I am, but her voice is so beautiful.
The origins of mermaids? Reading in Reddit the strange occurrences some people had experienced always makes me feel better. I'm not an English speaker, and I'm probably hundreds of miles from all of you, but in some way I feel your experience is intimate and personal in such a subject like this, one we should not usually speak of with strangers or even with our close ones, makes the connection between us something very comforting. I am going to share with you a very personal story, not a supernatural one, without demons, ghosts, or even scary technologies. This is a very simple, and in fact very natural occurrence, even if an incredible one, and I wish to share it even has been 2 years since it happened to me. I hope my English is understandable and wouldn't bog you too much. I am the older of 3 sisters, with a very active journalist mother and a good health. I grew in the city of Santiago, Chile, but I was fortunate enough to have grandparents in the coast, in a beautiful town called San Antonio. Of course, I spent every holiday in the beach with them, and I grew to be a very strong swimmer and a confident sporty girl. My family chose to reunite living in the south with my uncle after the earthquake of 85 foot, and we relocated to Temuco, a young and bustling city with no ocean. I kept my sport interests in my high school and university years, but I missed the sea a lot. I took every opportunity to swim and eat crabs and fish, which I liked very much before this. I was happy when right after graduation I found a job on Concepcion, a coast city, and overjoyed finding a house to rent not half an hour from the beach, a lonely and non-swimming beach because its strong cold currents, but a beautiful place nonetheless. It was separated from the fairly new housing project for some like 2 kilometers of sandy dunes and some holes in rocks left from the construction. I could see to the horizon in both sides, being a fairly peninsula-like place, and I loved it. Anyway, it was relatively isolated and in the extreme of the city. I commuted 1 hour in train to my job, and when I had an emergency in the beach, my dog almost ate a fish hook left in the sand, and I had to carry him in my arms more than 2 kilometers to the neighbor dog clinic to have it removed. He recovered well, but my back and nerves suffered. Since he is a fat mutt the size of a Doberman, I recognized the no-help-around-ness of the place. Being a strong girl and a good runner, and enjoying its solitude, I brushed it at a one-time thing and kept visiting almost daily trips the beach. There was another surprises. In winter I loved beach picking after storms, so I went even in rainy days to pick feathers from seagulls, shells, and sometimes bounty from the waves. I got a cognac beautiful glass bottle I still use to store wine, some unusual shells, a pair of glass pieces so smoothed it seems jewelry-like, and I even found a plastic box with some coins inside. The storms brought sometimes strange visitors. A penguin was stranded once, and rescued for a lady who carried him to animal rescue. I saw 2 times sea lions frolicking in the waves in a rainy winter day, and in spring we had a strange invasion of red flower-like algae that lasted like a week. I loved going there, and one of my dogs, a girl called Flower, loved it even more. So it passed not a day where I visited the surf walking or running with her, or another of my dogs. My arms grew tired pulling the leash in more than 2 of the 4, so we took turns. I am a very die-hard fan of Lord of the Rings, so I liked to sit daydream and watch the sea for hours when it was sunny and imagine Eresia and the Teleri ships. And one sunny morning I had gone with Flower for a run when I saw something white in the water. I stood and went to the surf for a better look, and my heart almost stopped when I noticed it was a hand. I had wondered many times if ever a body has been washed out to that beach, and what would I do if I ever saw one. But this one was still far from shore, and the shock I felt was nothing I ever imagined. Flower started barking like mad, and then, the hand in its arm moved out of the water, and then other one, and I saw the shine of a dark-haired head moving. It was a person, and was moving. It was alive. I was scared as hell. The waves there were so strong and powerful that no one ever swam there, and the times I tried it, of course I tried it, the current almost pulled me. But this was a person, and we were too far for me to get help quick. I even had my cell phone with me. Even as Flower kept barking and growling, I took my jeans, sweater and sneakers off as fast as I could and jumped in the water, praying to be able to help the girl and manage not to drown myself in the attempt. She didn't look to be too far, and the waves were especially calm that morning. I really thought I had a chance. And I couldn't stand the idea of the girl drowning. Meanwhile, I went for help. Even as I swam and submerged myself in the cold water that beautiful day, I noticed Flower, a golden lab that loved the sea so much I had to physically carry her out of the waves when they were too rough or too cold for her to dip her paws, didn't enter the water and barked like a mad banshee. I remember clearly every arm stroke I gave, every wave I dove under, and how many thanks I gave heaven when I saw black hair floating not far from me. The girl had submerged, and I feared she was dead. Her arms seemed to float aimlessly, even as his back was in a hunched position. I didn't see her legs or feet, but she moved diagonally to the waves, emerging in a strange way. I feared for a moment she could be a victim of the 2010 earthquake and tsunami, but it was impossible. It had been more than 2 years ago, and she looked whole and fine. I made a grab for her, not more than 10 meters again, and something hit my torso and scraped me underwater. It was so sudden I screamed and almost went under. The reflection of the sun blinded me. I saw my arm scraped like by sandpaper when I looked at it, blood flowing, and the girl moved away from me. For a moment her arms shooting up with a whip-like movement and her head went back in the same movement. Like a ship maiden, she sailed, covered to the shoulders by the waves. Then I saw her face and I started screaming and swimming like mad back to shore. Her face was not there. It was a mix of white bone, white flesh, and little crabs. I kept screaming and splashing to shore, and for a moment she seemed to get nearer, but then I felt Barks and Flower, swimming like a champion, paddled near me barking like mad. A wave I did not see coming grabbed us both and lifted us, and I thought we both would drown, but I closed my hand in Flower's collar and fought the current till I felt sand on my feet and we dragged each other to shore. I don't know how much time I was screaming and crying clung to my girl in the dry sand, but when I turned to the sea the thing was gone. My mind was filled with mermaid zombies ideas and scared as hell. as went still crying to the police station in the neighborhood and blurted, shoeless and dripping, a report about a girl's body I saw in the water. It was not till I was there I noticed my whole side and right arms were scraped as I would have fallen on concrete. I got a X-ray, with 2 ribs cracked. I took medical leave, and stayed home with Flower and my other dogs, plagued by nightmares and too fearful to go back to the beach. It was not till a month afterwards that I went to the police station to try to know something more, and there was where I learned the truth which still saddens me today. The girl was a missing person, apparently a worker in the nearby Talcahuano port who fell and drowned in an accident. In a strange twist, a warm water shark ventured into our cold Humboldt current and tried to eat her body, but it seems she was wearing a safety belt, which came entangled in the shark, not a big one, mouth, side and bronchi. The movement I saw was the shark, half asphyxiated, shaking his head to get rid of the obstruction, and it was his tail what hit me. The shark was found 2 days later, near death, in the Nibi city of Lota, where volunteers freed the remains of the girl and tried to help the shark. They took the belt away, but they don't know if the shark survived in the cold water after that, as exhausted as it was. Now, I don't eat fish and I moved for job-related reasons to Carahue, a valley city. I frequent parks now, and even if I like still the sea, I will never forget that experience. Maybe in cases like this one and not manatees originates the stories of mermaids?